Yes, the Northern Lights are definitely part of it because I guess, Northern Lights to me it represents, because we say Northern Lights, it is the North. It kind of represents aspirational for me personally to look back in towards Quebec and Canada from the South. And I think there's something like you talked about. There's something magical when we see those Northern Lights. I've only seen them maybe twice in my entire life. And there's something very magical and powerful about that, about seeing those lights. And even though scientifically we know how northern lights are created from the electromagnetic, forces from the sun and interaction with the magnetic fields of the earth, so who cares? What I really was cared about, what it really means to me is I can see how our ancestors looked at those northern lights and felt it was the spirit of their ancestors dancing in the sky. And so that's how it's portrayed in the book. And the shawl itself, when Assababish in the second story of the first book, when he grabs the northern lights and throws them into that shawl, and it fuses the colors and the magic of those northern lights, and that's carried through. Characters pass it on, child or mother to child, or mother to grandmother to grandchild, all the way down. That northern lights is infused in that shawl, and that's passed down, part of a family. It's part of who we are.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter, the author podcast, where we bring on amazing authors from around the world. My guest is joining us from the U.S., but his roots in Canada run deep, and you're going to love his books that he's graciously sent me copies of, and they are beautifully illustrated. We're going to get into that. These are hefty books. These are not small books. They're gorgeous. Old Grandmother's Tree is the title of each, and they're just gorgeous. And we're going to talk about these in great detail today. And our guest, Joesph Bolton, is here on the podcast. Joesph, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you here.
Oh, I'm really excited to be here with you, and I'm glad that you like the books.
It's amazing. And what I love is you have an amazing illustrator that you've partnered with as well. We're going to get into that. But first, before we get to go there, Joesph, tell us where you are in this great big world of ours, and also the connection with Canada. Let's talk about that a little bit. But where are you in this big world of ours?
Sure. I am in small city, kind of a large town called Leominster, Massachusetts, about 40 miles west of Boston. On my mother's side, I am part of the great French-Canadian heritage within New England itself. And I was born in Rhode Island. My mother's family is 100% French-Canadian. Well, at least in the sense that they all came from Quebec. But all four of my mother's grandparents, for example, were born in Quebec. And I've always been fascinated by my connection with family history. And of course, growing up, back in the 70s, you only can know so much. Maybe you know your great grandparents, you know what city they come from. But after that, it's all kind of a mysterious veil. But as an adult, I did research. I built my entire tree, my mother's entire family history, all the way in Quebec, all the way out to Nova Scotia when the first settlers arrived. And as part of that research, I gave my mother and some of her siblings a DNA test. And, growing up, my mother's family always said, my grandparents and my great aunts always said, we're 100% French. Well, turns out we're mostly French, but there's a little bit of English, a little bit of Irish, and Spanish, but there was also Native American that showed up in the DNA test results. And, at that time, we weren't aware of what our Native American roots were. And it took me about 2 years to find 4 gateway Native American ancestors. One was a Penobscot named Matacawando, and his daughter married a French baron named Baron St. Castine, who has a very interesting story. If you want to research that, anyone who wants to research that, very fascinating. Also, 2 were Mi'kmaq from Nova Scotia. But probably the one that had the most that really touched me personally was a young Algonquin woman from Trois-Rivières named Mitio Goku. And as it turns out, her story was very well documented. And at the very end of her life, the priest of Trois-Rivières wrote this very short but beautiful eulogy for her, wrote it in his diary, and I'll read it to you. And it's really the heart of the book. It's kind of like the starting point. And this is what he wrote of Mitio Goku when she died in 1699. He said, Mitio Goku lived a full life with dignity, respect, and love. A courageous and loving Algonquin woman. And when you think how unusual that is for a priest to write that about a woman back at the end of the 17th century, much less a First Nations woman, she had to have a really remarkable life and really make an impression. And as it turned out, her young adulthood was marked with tragedy, but yet she persevered through that. And at the end of her life, someone could say about her that she lived a life of dignity, respect, love, and courage. And so what was this tragedy? What happened to her? Well, when she was 22 years old, and it was about 1652 in Trois-Rivières, she was married to another Algonquin man named Assababish. And they had two small children, a boy and a girl. And the Mohawks came up from New York into what we call now Quebec and raided their village. And her husband was killed, and her two small children were taken away by the Mohawks, and she never saw them again or even knew what happened to them. They just disappeared. So here she is at 22. She lost her husband. She lost her two children. She lost everything. And it's very easy, I think, for anyone to face a tragedy like that, to become a person of bitterness and despair. But she didn't. She rebuilt her life. 5 years later, she married a French settler named Pierre Cauque, and she became my ancestor. And not only my ancestor, but the ancestor of thousands of French Canadians in Canada and the United States. So there are people who are listening to this podcast right now who are also descendants of Pierre Cauque and Mitio Goku. And in a sense, she's almost like one of the ancestral mothers of us French Canadians, because she's an ancestor of many of us. And so I retold her story and a story about her life. Now, many people have ancestors and they write historical fiction, and that's uncommon. That's very common for people to do that. But what I did is something a little different, and as you see it in the books, is that I took her story and the story of her family and the people around her, and I reimagined their life immersed in a magical, reimagined Quebec with folklore and interacting with Native American and First Nations trickster animal characters, or at least inspired by Native American or First Nations trickster characters. And so it's a mix of true history. It's a mix of a little bit of drama, but there's a little bit of farcical stories in there too with the trickster animal characters, because that's kind of like what they do. And it's there's, between the two volumes that I have right now, 10 stories, 40,000 words, and over 450 full color illustrations that each one had to be meticulously designed and created. And as you can see, they're not quick little, it took hours of work for each one of these illustrations. And so it's a very unusual book. Nobody writes a book like that. And in fact, when I describe this book to people who never see it, I said, so what is this book you write, this old grandmother's tree? Well, it's a story about my Quebecois and Algonquin ancestors in a reimagined Quebec with magic and folklore and trickster animal characters. And they look at me kind of like, what? How does that work? But yet, when I take a copy of this book and I hand it to someone,
right,
and they look at it, they get it. They get it immediately, and it really touches them. And it's growing, I think, in interest in the United States and Canada.
Interesting. Now, again, from your perspective in the U.S., you're looking across the border into Quebec. you have a different perspective on where you live geographically. Why is this book so important to you? Like beyond the story of your legacy and the people who've gone before you, why is this book
Well,
so important? What do you think?
I think part of it's important because it's one way, it's like my love letter to my ancestral home,
Hmm.
which is Canada and Quebec, which I love both deeply. That's one. And that's when I started writing a few years ago. But I also think it was very timely because given some of the stuff that's kind of going on, and it was my way of trying to keep that bridge open and that connection.
Hmm.
And that part is very important to me. And I think also it's kind of a culmination of how my views of my connection to Quebec have changed since I was a boy. When I was a child, I knew about Quebec. I knew about Canada. With a family, we'd go up and visit. In Ontario, we'd go visit up in Quebec many times. And I was always aware as I grew older, intellectually, I was aware of my connections with Quebec and Canada. But as when I did my family research and started understanding the people, the stories of those people, of my ancestors, it really changed for me. And now when I go visit up Quebec, it really touches me emotionally
Hmm.
because, I look around and I see French Canadians, I see people who are very likely my cousins. We have common ancestors. Maybe we have to go back 6 generations, but those ancestors, that commonality is there. And walking the ground that my ancestors walked on, I, look at the mountains that they looked upon,
Hmm.
or even see the statues like Louis Hebert, okay, he's an ancestor, so it really becomes a different kind of connection. But at the same time, I also know because I wasn't born there, and I also know that I struggle with French, even though I'm
Yeah.
trying my hardest to learn and keep up with that. I know that I'm not totally, a part of it, but I do feel that connection. So it's a real interesting dichotomy within myself when I visit. So it does provide kind of it's almost like you're there and you're part of it, but you also have kind of an outsider look too.
How how does understanding your past, your ancestry, and your family tree, how does that help you today to kind of live differently? Had you not known all of this information about your family, you might not be writing a book like this and sharing a story like this. Like, why is it so important to you to understand your background and where you've come from?
Because I think each of us, regardless of where our ancestors come from, we are the continuation of the story of our ancestors.
Right.
And for example, me writing the book in a meta sense is really the continuation of old grandmother's tree. You
Right.
could write a whole story from Mitio Goku all the way to me writing the book about her. That's a continuation. So I think intuitively, if we think about it, many of us have a sense that we're a continuation of the story of our ancestors, even if we don't know. But having that understanding has really given me that empowerment to really connect with that story and for me to add to it in a conscious way by writing this book. And
How much research goes into this, though, from your perspective, to sit down and start writing these stories? Like, give me some idea.
oh gosh, it was thousands of hours of work. It was all researching the tree. I've got thousands of names in my French Canadian tree. It was researching the original sources from the Jesuits about Mitio Goku. It was not only just writing that portion of it, but it was also reading First Nations folklore. Although I didn't lift directly stories from First Nations folklore, or even the characters that I have in the book are really kind of original. Although some have names that are very similar to other characters, I still research those folk tales so I get a sense of what those characters were and how it works, so that a person reading it will say, "This sounds familiar. It sounds like First Nations mythology because it's meant to be that way." Illustrations took a lot of work to really research like that. For example, how did the Algonquin and other First Nations people live in the 17th century. How did they dress? They didn't live like, Hollywood,
Yeah.
which we look at, people on the plains, First Nations on the plains, and they live in teepees and,
Yeah.
and they dress differently. It's totally different. So it took a lot of work to research that. The stories are set in the vicinity of Mount Orford in Quebec. So we research how does it look? How does different scenes look from the lake, Memphremagog right there, Mount Orford? How does it look? How is the mountain shape? So it took a lot of research to try to give an authenticity to these stories. Culturally, the stories of their lives, the records, when they lived, where they lived, and just trying to make sure the illustrations capture the feeling of the time period and the locations that the stories were set in.
I'm imagining you sitting at a desk with a candle. For some reason, there's a candle. And you have like two different books open and you're comparing between the two of them to settle on your story. And in that moment, you're like, wait a minute. If this is true and these things are true, then there's this like aha moment that you're having where you're like, oh my gosh, like this is the thing, it's happening. And you push back from the table and you're like, oh wow, like this is really happening. Did that like happen often for you in this?
Oh, I would say it was even a little deeper than that in the sense that I started writing the stories and I didn't really have a grand plan of how this book was going to look like. I wrote one story and I thought it was kind of cute. And I said it was take place in the eastern townships of Quebec, 1902. A farm, my great great grandmother's farm, and the farm animals sneak out at midnight and go tobogganing down the hill. Very Quebec story, I think. you know, but when we drew the illustrations, one of the things we added a little detail was we gave my great great grandmother Delia Meunier, we gave her a shawl that had the colors of the Northern Lights, which are in the illustrations of that story. The story was Le Trope de Sabot, and we said, we didn't know why we did that when I worked with Natasha, but we decided we're going to do that. Well, it turns out my great great grandmother in the story is, of course, a descendant of Mitio Goku. So then the aha moment was, oh, why don't we make that shawl magical and we'll make it belong to Mitio Goku, that it originally was hers and it was passed out from generation to generation. And then the next question is, well, why is it the color of the Northern Lights? Well, we wrote a whole story about that. We're in the second story of the first book, on Mitio Goku's wedding night to her second husband, Pierre Kauk. The spirit of her first husband visits her and basically tells her to, move on. It's okay. I want you to be happy, build something beautiful with your life. And as a gift, he captures the northern, reaches up to the sky, grabs the Northern Lights and throws them into the shawl, and the shawl now has the color of the Northern Lights. So, and then around Mitio Goku was all these native, First Nation trickster animal characters, and how do they interact with her? So it became like a thread that I just kind of like tugged on, and the more I tugged on it, the more the story came out. It kind of came out on its own. And it really ties in a lot. I think how the creative process works as an author works different for everyone. But for me, I think a lot of the creativity occurred at a subconscious level, and it came out slowly on its own. And every story, every illustration in the two volumes became like a little piece of a mosaic that I would put together on a wall, creating a larger picture, which is these stories, which are these two books.
Now, this part of the conversation is going to make your illustrator, Natasha, smile. And we're going to talk about you, Natasha. I know you're listening to this. So now we're going to love on you for a while, because a big chunk of this book being so impactful is the artwork. And your love of what she's done on these books, it shows every time I talk to you. You're so proud of how this book turned out because of Natasha's hard work and her vision for it, and how she took your story and your words and gave them life. So let's talk about Natasha. Talk about maybe how you found her and kind of how it was working with her Again, she's listening, so we're going to wait embarrass her a little bit,
Okay.
but it's all in
Hello,
love. It's all in
Natasha.
love. Yes, hi,
Yes.
Natasha. Talk a
Yes.
little bit about her. Like, talk about this.
Sure. I'd love to talk about her. It was no accident that her name is on the front cover
Right.
with the book right next to mine.
Yeah.
I consider her a co-author. And the illustrations are designed to work in a way that they're two halves, that they have to work together. The text and the illustrations work together to tell a story. Neither one stands alone by themselves without the other. Natasha Pelly Smith, she's a very accomplished artist. She lives in Toronto. She was actually trained in France as an artist. I mean, just very well trained. And how I found her? Well, I needed an artist. I needed an illustrator, and I really wanted somebody from Canada because of the deep connections of this book with Canada. I wanted a person to have that kind of cultural sense and context. And Natasha was like the first name that popped up when I Googled illustrators in Canada. And so she was the first and only artist I actually interviewed. So you got to tell me that I really do believe, and Natasha feels the same way, that our ancestors really wanted this book to come together. And I think also it really touched to her as we started talking about this project. She had recently been discovering, her connections to the Ojibwe and the Cree, and there was another First Nations community. I can't remember off the top of my head, but she kind of discovered those roots too when she was connected by a long lost aunt who was part of the Ojibwe community and kind of brought her back in. And so she was really discovering her roots as well. And she at times would feel, as we worked together doing these illustrations and designing them, that she felt that her ancestors also wanted her to do this work, especially in the parts that illustrated the life of the First Nations in Canada itself. And, when we first started this, we had La Trope de Sabot, and maybe I said, let's start a second story. We're going to continue that. And I think the story was Maurice Gets a Medal was the second story I wrote. And Natasha's like, okay, that sounds really good too. So we'll put that together. We're going to have these two stories in a book. And then I was like, we really have got to talk about more about Mitio Goku's wedding. So then it became Old Grandmother's Tree was the next story I was wrote, which became the title of the whole series. And I always added more and more on Natasha's plate. But she stuck with it. She really believed in this project. And, because it was such a long project, it became very difficult for her. Because especially as an artist, you think about when you do like an artwork or art project like this, the economics of it.
Right.
You have to make some changes. You have to make some changes, illustrations. Some things need to be redone. So it takes a little bit more time. Well, if you're doing a book with maybe 30 illustrations, that's no big deal. But if you're going to do a book with 450 illustrations, all that lost time starts accumulating. And pretty soon you're just putting a lot of extra hours in above what you were paid. I actually exceeded the contract that I had with Natasha and gave her more because she worked so hard at it. But I really feel very fortunate to have her because she understood. She put those illustrations in. When you look at those, you see a dimensionality. They can very three-dimensional. They have a three-dimensional look to them. The color palettes in them so really bring the story to life. And on her own, she would put details in those illustrations that connected with stories we haven't even written yet. It's just amazing how that happened. And she said, we were talking about this as time goes on, thousands of hours of work piled on. She says, I'm sticking with this to the end. We're going to get this done. And we did. And we're going to work again. In fact, just a couple of weeks, she's actually going to start the illustration of our next book in the same series, The Old Grandmother's Tree, called The Dance of Creation, which will be a sequel and a prequel to Old Grandmother's Tree. And beyond that, we have another book coming out next year that she'll start illustrating before the end of this year as well. Wow. So the collaboration continues.
It's amazing.
And it is.
It is amazing. Yeah, Natasha, as you listen to this, I just want, from my perspective as a reader and with a copy of the book in my hand, your attention to detail. And I can tell that you are passionate about this from an artist's point of view and that the story resonated with you as well. I can see it in everything you've put into this. Her heart's in this book as well, not just her paintings and her artistry. I can see her heart here as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was definitely, it wasn't a mechanical process like, okay, I'm going to do these illustrations and I'll just throw something on paper. She really gave of herself, and it really shows in every illustration. And of this 450, every one of them had to be meticulously designed and talked about and discussed and then created and sometimes adjusted after the first get. And we did that for 450 illustrations. It takes a lot of dedication for an artist to commit to a project of this size. And I think it's because she really loved this story, and she loved the characters in the book and the story itself, and she wanted to be a part of it. And I think it really shows that love of the people, the characters, the First Nation people especially, really shows in those illustrations.
It's amazing. Tell me what some of the response has been from readers, people who have got the book. What are they saying? What are you hearing back?
Well, I think that a lot of people are like, they don't, first of a lot of people, like I said, I describe a book, people are like, well, what is it? How does that work? I don't understand. I had one bookseller very, very early on, before I even had the book, the first draft done. I was just showing her the cover, and I described it. She's saying like, well, I hope you had a good time, because I don't think that's going to go anywhere. And I said, how can you say that? You haven't even looked at the book. But the truth is, people who look at this book really see that there's a hunger out there for something positive. And that's what this book has. It's not only entertaining, but there's a positive message of family, love, about respect, and respecting our heritage and remembering our heritage. That's all there in these books. But it's done in a way that it doesn't hit you over the head with the moral lesson of the story. It's done in a very entertaining way. And everyone who looks at the book is just like, wow, I just can't believe how good this is. And, just the connection. And one of the most interesting connections I made with this book was just as we were finishing up. This was last July of 2024. We had just finished, I had finished the rough draft, and I sent them to the Algonquin community in Pembroke, Ontario. And I found them by just kind of Googling. I said, looking for Algonquin communities that I can reach out and talk to about this book. And because Mitio Goku was an Algonquin woman. And so I reached out to them and I said, hey, can I just send you this book? Just tell me what you think. And I did. And I met Paul Latteroute out there in Pembroke. I reached out to him. He loved the book. He absolutely loved it. And so did other people of the community. And I actually have sent copies to him. He gives them away to people out there in Pembroke itself. And their response was just great. And also I actually went up there and visited the community in Pembroke and met some other descendants of Mitio Goku that actually live in that community, which was really gratifying for me personally as well. And Natasha actually joined me up there for one of those visits. And that was the first time we actually met face to face. She drove up from Toronto about 4.5 hours with her boyfriend, and we met in Pembroke. And we sat there and we talked about the books with the director of the community, and it was great. And so in honor of them, I kind of set this story. The next book is kind of the framing story is like a grandfather, an Algonquin grandfather in Pembroke, Ontario, is telling the story of the creation of the world to his grandchildren. So in honor of the Algonquin community in Pembroke, I kind of set the next story in their community.
There you go. Wow.
But yeah. So, but I actually set that framing story 100 years in the future. And I did that deliberately. You may say, well, why did you do that? Well, part of it because I want readers to read that and understand that they're immersed inside the story. this is a story that's unfolding now and today. It's not just something that happened in the past. And on the very title part of the page, it says, Algonquin grandfather sitting around a campfire with his grandchildren in Pembroke, Ontario, Canada. And there was something else. There's another little message there that I wanted to put in there very subtly.
What is that?
So it says,
Yeah.
So see, it takes place in 2126, August of 2026, about 100 years from now. But it says Ontario, Canada. And I want to make sure that was very clear in that story as well. So that's kind of like my little message to Canada as well.
There. I like that
my little
nod
to Canada.
That's good.
That 100 years from now, we're going to still have Canada.
And you and I are going to get
Proud and
together
strong.
100 years from now and continue this podcast, right?
If I can, yes.
Okay.
So yeah, and it's it's growing slowly but steady. One of the challenges I think of today, especially because you have the capability of doing like a lot of self-publishing, that there's so many options out there. So it does take time for the word to get out, but the word is getting out about this book slowly but steady. And once the Dance of Creation comes out, and I have the English and French, my next objective is to actually go to Magog, Quebec, which is is the kind of the inspiration for the setting of Old Grandmother's Tree in Quebec, and actually share the book with the library out there and even the mayor's office. Say, look, I set the story in an area that's right next to right where the town of Magog is. Here's Mount Orford, which stands over Magog. Here's Lake Memphremagog, which is right on the shore of, or right next to Magog itself, and I set it right here. So that'll be my next objective.
Wow, it's amazing. When you do your research and stuff as well, you trace your family. Is there family transitioning across the border into the U.S. in your story as well, or is most of your family history then mostly in Quebec and Canada?
Well, the second book ends with my great grandparents, one of my mother's grandparents, actually leaving Quebec in 1902 and heading down to Rhode Island, where they eventually settled.
Oh,
and I did that. And in this story, the characters kind of talk about some of the reasons why French Canadians during that time period actually left Quebec. There were millions. I think there was one estimate I read where 1/3 of the population, the French Canadian population in Quebec, actually left Quebec during this time period around the end of the 19th, early 20th century and settled in New England. There was a tremendous number of people who left. And my great-grandparents, when they're talking to each other, they were saying, well, there's no jobs up here. That's what my great-grandfather said. I'm a tool maker. There's plenty of jobs in Rhode Island. My great-grandmother said there's not very many farms left for me to settle on. To continue farming, it's very difficult. So they both left. And that's a lot of the reason why they left. But the story, interesting enough, you talk about going back and forth. In the story that I'm writing right now, which is going to be called All Around You, There Is a Light. That's going to be the book. And at the end of that story, my great niece, born here in the U.S. as an adult in 2064, is going to be shown returning to Trois-Rivières, where the story began, and settling there. And in fact, I talked about Meta. At the end of the story, she's going to be it's 2064. She's about 40 years old. She's going to have a copy of Old Grandmother's Tree in the book. She's using it almost like a tourist guide and say, look, here's the pond where Uncle McKeish the turtle lived. It's right here in Trois-Rivières. And she's going to meet Uncle McKeish, and she's going to tell Uncle McKeish that I'm staying. My great-grandparents came from Quebec down to Rhode Island. And I'm leaving New England, and my family and I are going to settle right up here in Trois-Rivières, kind of closing the loop. And she'll also be wearing the shawl that originally belonged to Michio Goku, continuing it on. So the story continues. So, yeah, the first two books, they end with people coming from Quebec to New England. And then I'm going to show that perhaps there are some people who are coming back from New England back into Quebec.
Well, the one thing I can verify is your background while we're chatting and the Northern Lights that appear so often in your book. I've had the opportunity to see it several times, and
Very
the
good.
shimmer in the sky, it is breathtaking. It's nothing like fireworks. It's nothing like anything man-made.
You're
It's
gonna.
just so gorgeous, and I love how that's pulled in artistically and through your words into the stories as well. It's a great representation from what I've seen in the past, and I'm excited to see again. Going back to the artwork, Natasha's captured beautifully, but I love that that's a theme back to the shawl and everything as well. I like how
Oh
that's all tied
yes,
together. That's amazing.
yes, yes. The Northern Lights are definitely part because I guess Northern Lights to me it represents because we say Northern Lights, it is the North. It kind of represents aspirational for me personally to look back in towards Quebec and Canada from the South.
Yeah.
And I think there's something like you talked about. There's something magical when we see those Northern Lights. I've only seen them maybe twice in my entire life. And there's something very magical and powerful about that, about seeing those lights. And even though scientifically we know how northern lights are created from the electromagnetic, forces from the sun and interaction with the magnetic fields of the earth. So who cares?
Yeah.
What I really was cared about, what it really means to me is I can see how our ancestors looked at those northern lights and felt it was the spirit of their ancestors
Right.
dancing in the sky.
Yeah.
And so that's how it's portrayed in the book. And the shawl itself, when Asababish in the second story of the first book, when he grabs the northern lights and throws them into that shawl, and it fuses the colors and the magic of those northern lights, and that's carried through characters, pass it on, child or mother to child or mother to grandmother to grandchild, all the way down. That northern lights is infused in that shawl, and that's passed down, part of a family. It's part of who we are.
And again, like go back to it again. That the idea that Natasha can take your words and give them life through imagery, and how your words and her art together have just made this book, both books, so engaging. They draw you in. I love how the two of you work together on this, and I love too that you give so much prominence to her in the writing of the book as well. It's great.
Oh, it would not exist without her.
Yeah.
And I'm so fortunate to have her as a partner in this project. I understand her art so well that as I'm writing the stories, I can already see her art on the page, how it's going to be and how it comes out and comes forth.
It's
And that's
amazing.
how close we work on we have teamed up on this project. And I can't imagine working with anyone else on this. Somebody who would have the patience and the dedication and the love of the story to put so much of herself in above and beyond what as an artist, the minimal requirements that she could have done as an artist, she did far beyond that.
It's gorgeous, and these are hefty books. Everybody, these aren't small little shove them in your pocket books. These are beautiful, great for your kids as well, for bedtime stories and reading, and for your kids to fall in love with these characters and see the artwork. It's a great family book that's going to get a lot of love over the years as you continue to read it and share it. I think you're really going to enjoy this. The website's on the back of the books, I notice as well. Tell us a little bit more about your website as well,
Oh yeah,
Joseph.
so
Yeah.
yeah, sure. So the website is called oldgrandmotherstree.com. There is an English section, but there's also a tab for French as well. And the website is great. I've got links to other podcasts I've done. I've got a blog. I talk a little bit about some of the development, some of the work that's actually gone into some of the other books and upcoming books. There is a mosaic that we put together with just a small number of the illustrations that are actually included. I think there's maybe 16 of them, 16, 17 of them, and we built this beautiful mosaic. And there's also a character Wikipedia because this book is, you'd be surprised how many
Oh
characters are
yeah.
in this book. I think I counted up, I think there's like well over 100 entries in the Wikipedia between characters and locations and magical objects. And if you go to the website and you look at the Wikipedia, you'll discover other characters that may not have even been mentioned yet. It will probably appear in other stories if you read it carefully.
It's amazing. It's a beautiful book. I'm encouraging everyone to go grab a copy, even if you don't have roots in Quebec and Canada. I think you're going to love this book. You have 2 volumes right now at the time of recording, more coming, and I just think this would be a great idea for you and your family to enjoy. They're beautiful, Joesph.
Well, thank you,
Excellent.
and I owe much to Natasha as well.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit of timing as far as you can in the future and when we can expect more from the dynamic duo, the 2 of you.
Oh yeah, so the next book, and it's going to be called The Dance of Creation. It'll contain basically one story instead of multiple stories. But it will be coming out, I think, by the end of the summer, maybe probably September. It'll come out. It'll be in French and English. And I've already written the follow-on book after that called All Around You There Is a Light. And that story is going to be fantastic. I'm really excited about that one. That's going to tell about the end of the life of Mitio Goku, her last 2 days, as she recounts the key aspects of her life, the attack from her perspective to her granddaughter. So it's going to be a very dramatic book. And that story is written. And we're working on the rough sketches to that right now. That'll come out next year. And I do have hope, especially with the Dance of Creation, which I told you before is set in Pembroke, Ontario, and narrated by an Algonquin grandfather to his grandchildren. One of the goals I have for that book is to have it translated into Algonquin, the Algonquin language. So that's very expensive to do. I've looked into translation services, like $4 a word. So when you have a story that's 4,500 words, that adds up to a lot of money. But you know what? I have faith that I really do believe that Algonquin language edition of the Dance of Creation will come into existence someday. It will happen. It's just I'm not sure how it's going to happen yet. Whether I seek grants from the government or accept donations, like a GoFundMe page. Somehow we're going to make that happen. So that's one of the goals I have for this book as well, is to have an Algonquin language edition in honor of my Algonquin ancestors, but also to encourage and support the learning of the Algonquin language, because like many First Nation language, sadly, they're endangered.
Right.
So I want to contribute in that way to supporting Algonquin language literacy.
It's amazing. You never know who's listening to this, Joesph. Somebody could be listening to this going, I have the resources, I have the things, the tools that you need, and I'd love to work with you and partner with you and help you get to that goal. Right? You never know.
Absolutely. I hope so. I'm hoping that out there, I do believe there is a white knight out there who could hear this and say, that is a worthy project, and I will help contribute to that.
It's a beautiful
I do
project.
believe that. It's just a matter of finding it there, but I do believe that. And the other goal I have, and I think is, especially after the next 2 books get finished, and I'll have a much broader or larger set of stories, is I would love to see this become an animated series produced in Canada as a Canadian content animated series, because the book is very Canadian. I mean, I was born here, but my mother's family all came from Canada. Natasha is from Toronto.
Yeah.
The book, the editorial services and the book design occurred in Montreal. The book is very Canadian, and the story is, I think, very Canadian as well. And I'd love to see that come to life as an animated series produced in Canada or Canadians.
Wow.
So that's my goal.
Nice.
And I kind of believe that's going to happen somehow too. I'm just not sure how yet, but I do believe it will, because the story and the artwork that Natasha did is good enough for it, I think.
Oh, it's amazing. It's outstanding what she's come up with for you, and Again, the fact that you work together so well, the two of you, and she understands your heart for the book. She understands the story, and there's a connection for her personally as well. It's just a perfect match. Like, this was meant to be, Joesph.
Absolutely. I do believe it. I believe that both Natasha and my ancestors wanted this book to be written and created.
The future is bright. The future is
Yes,
bright,
it is.
Joesph.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Thank you for bringing these into the world. Thank you for sharing these stories with us and your passion to continue to bring language that could be fading away into the history. You're bringing it forward. You're focusing on stories that have so much value and we can learn from as well. Maybe stories that have never been heard. And I love that you're sharing that with us as readers. And I'm with you. I would love to see this animated. I would love to see this reaching more and more people. And even if our podcast, in a conversation, the two of us, maybe someone hearing this says, I would love to work with you and help you, they can always reach out to you through your website and connect with you that way. And
Yes.
if you're listening to this going, yeah, I can be a part of this, I know Joesph would love to have a conversation with you anytime that you hear this conversation. So please reach out to Joesph. And again, Natasha, thank you again for all of the love that you poured into both of these volumes so far and into the future as well. I know that Joesph is really excited to have you partnering with him. And Natasha, I just want to honor you for all of your work on this project as well.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on today.
Excellent, everyone. All information, as always, will be in the show notes. And I would love for you, when you buy these books, because I know you're going to buy these books, you're going to leave a great review as well, so that other people fall in love with both of these volumes and the future ones coming. Let people know why you love these books so much. Talk about the artwork, talk about the stories, so that someone else seeing this on a website or in a store will understand why these books are so important as we continue the story forward into the future. Joesph, thank you so much for being on Living the Next Chapter.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you so much for being here, and thank you to our guest for being part of Living the Next Chapter. Make sure you go like, follow, share this episode to support your fellow authors. And a reminder to always leave a review every time you buy a book from your favorite author. It means so much to them. It's your words back to the author on why this book means something to you. That's one responsibility that we have as readers, to support our authors by leaving great reviews. I know you've probably forgotten more than you've remembered to leave reviews. So my little ask of you here as we're exiting out of the episode, to go grab that stack of books behind you, put them on your desk, and go to the websites where you purchase these books and leave a review now. I know you bought the book years ago. Go leave a review today. Let the author know how much you love their book. Give really detailed information about why you love this book so much. Let's celebrate our authors by leaving a great review. And thank you for listening to Living the Next Chapter. Thank you for being here. See you next time.